Hello and welcome back to the Bonus Action Podcast. This is episode 4 here on the Downtime Activities channel. And today we are going to be discussing optimal gameplay decisions versus optimal storytelling decisions.
There is a big difference.
A lot of times there is.
And I think part of the problem kind of comes from video games. Like I don't want to be
at least
down
the
on,
mindset.
Yeah, I don't want to be down on video games because I play a lot of video games and a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of stuff from video games has been inspired by stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, but I just think there's kind of this mentality from video games of sort of always doing the optimal thing, and that's where you get even with character creation in tabletop RPGs, the idea of very specialized builds or min-maxing and stuff like that. The idea that at the end of the day, it's a game with statistical numbers and you're making dice rolls and your character being better or worse at certain skills affects their ability to succeed and will affect how well the game goes. But all too often, I think players, and we have absolutely done this quite often in the past, fall into the trap of making optimal decisions sort of by the statistics and by the numbers and ignoring the choices that make it a better story.
I think that, in multiple different RPGs and in multiple different ways, we've run into that in the past. It's a really easy thing to do. Like you said, there's this mentality, especially for people who play video games and stuff like that, where there's this A to B quickest answer solution to a problem. And I think here the classic example is if you've watched the Lord of the Rings series and at the end you're why didn't they just get on the eagles and fly and drop the ring into the volcano? That would have been so much easier. But would the Lord of the Rings been a very good movie if it was 15 minutes long and that's what happened?
Right.
That's, I think, a really good example to kind of compare it. The story decisions that are made, if you're making them to make the story more interesting or cause more kind of conflict in it, it can have much more fun results. And it kind of takes that same this is a game mindset and flips it on its head. Because there's this is a game, so let's use the numbers and do the optimal thing. And there's also this is a game, the point is to have fun, so who cares what the optimal decision is? This decision is more fun.
Right. And I've always looked at tabletop RPGs as being an exercise in group storytelling. And some systems are better than others at that, or at least sort of purifying that concept. But if you're there to tell a story about these heroes and villains and these adventures and and the dangers you're facing, quite often something gets removed there when you're just sort of speedrunning it, if that makes sense, or you're making all of your decisions to solve every problem in the most optimal way. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those give rise to wonderful stories.
Usually the best stories are ridiculous failures
or ridiculous successes.
There's
it's not that these are completely separate concepts. It's just that I think all too often people make the decision of this is me winning the game and sacrificing quite a bit in regards to that. And kind of the big example, and it was what really got me thinking about this concept over these past few days, is in the Savage Worlds campaign that I'm running for a bunch of you guys. You had, sort of completely by chance, you guys just decided to go to a place, and then you just managed to luck your way far enough along that your character had the opportunity to kill the main villain. In part of the way the Savage World system works for people who aren't all that familiar with it, incapacitated enemies or defenseless enemies, you can essentially kill for free.
It's coup de grace, right?
Yeah,
if someone's asleep, they can't really stop you from slitting their throat.
It's just a game action. It's you just apart from stuff like a dragon or something like that. You can just choose to do that, and your character found themselves in that position with the sort of the main villain's bedroom. He was asleep at the time, and you sort of really, and despite the urging of at least one other player, consciously made the decision not to kill the main villain. You like put a slash in the pillow as like I could have killed you and didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then very nearly died as a result in this like harrowing escape and stuff. But it sort of came back around to the session that we just did where you guys get to have this really kind of fun, snarky sort of reintroduction to the main villain when like, you know, it's both the villain viewing themselves in a position of power and all of you guys viewing yourselves in a position of power and like each just sort of scheming and stuff. But it's this really like it was just this really wonderful moment in this conversation back and forth, and it's sparking this whole series of events that you guys are sort of embarking on now that wouldn't have happened if you just killed the main villain and essentially deleted one of the quest lines from the campaign.
And the story you're running right now, in that, without going into too much detail on it, kind of has 3 quest lines that we're a part of in a way. Really 2 big ones, but one kind of diverges. And removing that one, it still would have been a fun and interesting story would have been involved with, but these moments wouldn't have happened if that character wasn't there, or they wouldn't have been as impactful if that character wasn't still there. And it kind of, my decision to do that was kind of twofold. One was as a person who tends to run games, and one was as a person who tries to play their character when they're playing in games. And that decision as someone who runs games was, I looked at this situation, I looked at this narrative that was being built, and I was like, this is not a satisfying end to this character. My character basically accidentally stumbling into assassinating them wouldn't have been it would have been a kind of funny story, but it wouldn't have been something that I would have felt was like a really rewarding, awesome resolution to that storyline. And it would have also, I knew from a running the game perspective, removing that chip from the table meant that there was a lot of story stuff that you as the person running the game would not be able to do anymore, or you'd have to do in different ways that wouldn't have been as fun and as engaging. The other piece of that as a player was the character I'm playing in that game, that character is very much a kind of, he's much more interested in the story than the action, and like this very like, he would make that decision because it's dramatic. And that's a dramatic decision, and that's something that'd be like exciting and rewarding to him as a player too. So as a character. So me playing that character, I wanted to play him as he was, and also there's personal ties there with like backstory. The reason this villain is a villain is because of the tie-in with the backstory of my characters, kind of. And so all of that coming together, I had this moment, and it was, as a player, I was just kind of sitting there like literally with the dagger in my hand, holding it up, being like, this is not how this character would do it. That's not how this story wants this moment to happen. And this is a interesting chip to lay on the table. This, instead of removing something from the table, it makes something that was there more interesting and complex, and helps the story be more interesting in the long run.
Right. And I absolutely appreciated that as the person running the game, like seeing a player make a conscious decision to improve the story and because, you know, in some sense, killing the main villain when you have the chance is the correct decision.
Statistically,
that's why video games, the vast majority of times, don't let you take a crack at the main villain until the right moment, or they arbitrarily, the villain escapes halfway through, or it's like fighting Alduin for the first time in Skyrim. It's like the game doesn't actually let you kill Alduin.
There's no way
the first time.
Yeah.
They want you to have this big set piece battle, but they don't want you to win the game early. And tabletop RPGs don't have that safety net most of the time. DMs can kind of fudge the numbers or kind of make up some way for villains to escape, but a lot of times that feels kind of cheap or cheesy. And I think a good example of one of the times this went wrong was when we ran through Curse of Strahd. And way too underleveled. We just kicked the shit out of Strahd the first time we met him and completely killed him. And he barely touched us the whole time. Like he shows up for this like scheduled fight
where he's supposed to kind of it was supposed to be kind of like an invitation in the end to his castle.
Yeah,
and
like
stuff.
It's kind of a bit of a fight, a bit of a back and forth where it's kind of an introduction, and he like invites you to dinner at the castle, and that's supposed to trigger the sort of whole last half of the adventure as you're like sort of exploring the castle and fighting Strahd. And he like appears and we just went, there he is,
get him, and threw him to the ground and kicked him until he took his lunch money, and it just, by chance of what we had found in the characters we built in the situation, it worked out to where like he had no escape and we just kind of killed the big bad way too early in a not super satisfying way, and it kind of hamstrung the whole game.
And it's funny.
It's a funny story.
It's a story we still tell, and it was kind of, it kind of continued the theme of our playgroup just murdering vampires at way too low a level, especially if they're the main villain every time. But like then the story was just over. We had nothing, like we just kind of,
with no Strahd, the curse of Strahd is a lot less intimidating.
We just kind of moved on and and rolled up a new campaign, really. Like, and obviously we're not just talking about like those big types of moments either, but like I just think there's absolutely a disconnect between players making the statistical choice and players making the sort of story driven choice, because I think all too often making the story driven choice feels like making the wrong decision, or feels like making like a bad decision, like...
And especially when you're the person making the decision, and like you're saying, you have other people at the table who are like, do it, here's your chance, get it. Like, people are rooting you on because they want because a lot of people's brains automatically go to that, like, this is the number crunch statistical best chance of victory decision you make right here. And so they're going to root on or support that decision more often than not. Unless you have a very wild and fun play group. If you do, good for you. And there's a time to make those decisions too. And there's a balance there to strike up. But
and games, the game moves forward by you making decisions. The vast majority of those decisions are going to be inspired by an outcome, an influence, like the outcome will be influenced by the statistics, the dice rolling, the numbers. If you never make the decision to defeat the main villain, the game sort of never ends.
Yeah.
So you're right. There is a time to make those decisions, but there is also a time to sort of purposefully take a step back and go, if I don't do this, it makes the relationship between these characters more interesting, and it makes the story that we're telling more interesting. So it's kind of the... we were joking about this scene in Secondhand Lions with the... it's the second time now that I've held your life in my hands. The next time it's mine. It's... you can have those moments,
And my character's now set up to have that moment sometime in the future, where now maybe he finds this same character on the end of his blade again, and he has that decision to be made again, and maybe he makes it that time too in the life, or maybe he says like, twice now I've spared you, stop what you're doing, and like gives this person another chance. And like, there's so much of these moments that are so impactful and rewarding that if you just do the stab him while he's asleep option there, you would never have the opportunity for. And it's just, like we were saying, it's not always with the big bad or like the big bad evil guy villain that these kind of things will happen. But when it is, it's so much harder to make that decision to not just end it, but it also can be so much more rewarding since it is such an important person. And I think that we're talking a lot about too with this, like the action versus inaction. Like there's also the action versus unoptimal action piece of this, which is instead of like there's a problem and there's a solution you come up with that's like, this will almost certainly work. But there's also another solution that could work and would be amazing if it did. And those kind of opportunities you should take as well, I think.
I agree. And it's not just it's not just players falling into this trap. I think DMs fall into this trap a lot as well. Obviously, DMs get a lot of shit for like fudging the numbers. And let's be honest, as DMs, we do occasionally do that. Usually, when I do it, it's to the mercy of the players. It's like, I'm not actually going to do this thing that I just rolled because, like, I don't want to kill somebody here.
Mm-hmm.
As a player, I feel like I always have the exact opposite mentality. Like, no, goddamn it, you rolled a crit. Like, I'm taking that damage.
Kill me. I want you to do it. I want you to hit me.
But as a DM, like the first session of my first campaign, I killed 2 characters. So that reputation has stuck with me. But I really do try and be merciful to players. It really feels bad to kill a player character for me. So like you kind of want to like fudge the numbers in their favor a lot of times, or the opposite of that. Like you don't, because it's the statistics, it's the number. The players have only done this much damage. So this touching moment and heroic blow doesn't actually kill the villain or slay the dragon or whatever. Whereas you revealed I believe some years after it happened in our a particular character death in our very first campaign, where he sacrifices himself to slay this dragon and end this battle, and it was this really touching moment and a turning point in the whole campaign. And you revealed some years later that if we'd been going by the rules, him sacrificing himself there wouldn't have killed the dragon. It had way too many hit points left. But it was a much more satisfying, even though it's sort of unoptimal from the sort of villain perspective. Yeah. Like, it's a much better story, and it creates this dramatic turning point in the campaign, as well as dramatic turning points in sort of like morality and just like mentality for a lot of the characters. So it's like, sure, in one sense it's unoptimal in a number crunch sense, but it was absolutely the correct story decision. I mean, we still bring it up in almost every one of these podcasts.
I feel we bring it up almost every time we start having a conversation about D&D, because it was one of those moments that's just become like the moment that we look to think of as an example for certain parts of storytelling in RPGs. And I think like the number crunch side is the DM there. Like, if you're running a game and there's a chance for something amazing to happen, but the numbers get in the way, don't let the numbers get in the way there. Again, this is a game. Yes. And by the very nature of it, the point is for a group of people to sit around a table, or to sit at computer screens if you can't sit around a table with the people you play with, and laugh and cry and have amazing moments and cheer and enjoy themselves and socialize and have fun. And so don't ever let the rules get in the way of having fun in that way. And as a player, don't let your need to succeed get in the way of that either. I can think of, I mean, I don't know if we've ever told the full story of Woolsworth, God of Sheep. But in this same campaign, there's a quest given to go get the eye of a Cyclops. And you guys know a rocky coast where Cyclops live in caves.
So this NPC, it was a total throwaway NPC. And we're intended to be one of these. And we're going to do a podcast at some point in the future about making NPCs likable and dislikable, and like how you should treat NPCs when the players really latch onto them. But it was meant to be this totally throwaway NPC. Just his voice and mannerisms were so goofy and entertaining, and we sold him a book, and then he immediately tried to sell the book right back to us in this just phenomenally dry manner. Everything that happened was just so much fun that every problem we ran into was just like,
but he knows something about that.
Yeah, let's go talk to Leonard and see what he knows about this. And and he was the classic like fetch quest giver NPC, where it's just like, I will pay you to give me this ridiculous thing you've never heard of. And you have no idea how to find. So it's like, okay, we need he wants a branch from an elder fey tree. Like,
don't know what that is.
Don't know what that is. We'll find it, maybe. Like, no, he wants a griffin's beak. And like we end it, and then at one point we're just like talking to a king about something totally random. We're like, do you happen to know where any griffins could be? We're having trouble finding them. We need a griffin's beak for this guy. But one of the griffin's beak is an excellent story as well. But the sort of the most legendary of these things that he sent us after was the Cyclops Eye. And we kind of already knew that it could be found on this particular strip of coastline, so we loaded up our ship and set sail. And now, if I were to think of the average D&D party, especially at the level you were at, like, you guys could handle a fight with a Cyclops. Oh, and we did.
Eventually. And so if I was them, I would have set up an ambush, and my method would be set up an ambush, get a surprise round on a Cyclops. They're not very perceptive. Take them out, take them out, pop their eyeball out, get out of there. They go and they find the home of one of these, and very classic Cyclops way, this one has like a pen of sheep that it's stolen from farmers and it's keeping in this one place.
And I think it was like one nature roll of like, oh, Cyclopses are very superstitious, they speak giant, like this and this, and immediately me and the other rogue in the party were just like, I have a plan. and it just immediately spiraled out of control as it was like, okay, the barbarian speaks giant, perfect. Like
this spellcaster has this spell that can make someone's voice really loud and booming.
Oh, and this spellcaster can has these spells and like
that can make creepy lighting.
And this guy
effects.
has a fire cantrip and stuff, and like so the Cyclops like leaves his cave to like go off hunting. We sneak into his cave, and the other rogue crits. It's the most glorious animal handling check of all time. Crits a check to get a sheep to come with us. Because we immediately, immediately half the party strikes upon the same idea to just convince the Cyclopses that this god is a sheep and have them source the Cyclops eye for us. So we named him this derpy sheep Woolsworth, and like set up this like ritual circle of dead sheep so that we're like, and like everything, and like everyone's hidden in the room so that when the Cyclopses came back, there's this floating glowing sheep with all these like arcane symbols painted on it, like floating like 20 feet off the ground. And the barbarian was sitting behind a rock yelling at the back wall of the cave so the voice would echo through the cave. And then we just took these Cyclopses on a wild spiritual journey, I guess.
You enlightened them, you showed them God, and then God told them to go track down one of their buddies and rip his eyeball out, and bring it back in the name of Woolsworth, God of Sheep.
And some gold, too. It's like, and every time they were about to figure us out, we would just like crit the next deception check.
And it'd be like a firebolt would hit the ceiling and you'd hear, "How dare you question Woolsworth, God of Sheep?"
And it's like, and it was so obvious, it was so easy to tell that you were just like, the whole time, just like, what have they, look at how they've massacred my boy, essentially. Like, look at what they've done to my campaign. But it was just like, it was absolutely not the optimal way to approach a situation. We could have been in and out of there in 10 minutes. And instead we spent like 12 hours setting up this like ridiculous scheme, and we ended up having to fight a totally different Cyclops on our way out anyway, because of course we were going to take Woolsworth, God of Sheep, with us.
Of course you were.
He was our buddy now, and like, but it was just such a stupid way to go about solving the problem,
and it's one of the best memories of D&D we have.
Absolutely, and something that you've talked about. Sort of as off and on, new players have joined the group and people who don't have experience playing RPGs. You mentioned some time ago now, a year or two, how refreshing it was to have a person playing who had never played D&D before, because they don't approach every move in combat like
tactically, like with the background of a bunch of knowledge of the numbers.
Oh, it's statistically it's best if I roll this attack using this weapon, so I'll do that, and I'll try and stand here and use this action or use this spell. They look at their character sheet and they're like, "Well, I've got a cauldron in my inventory. I'm just gonna tie the rope to the cauldron and swing that around, use that as a weapon." And everyone's like,
"You have a great axe. You're a barbarian. Crush them." But if they do it this way, and if you're the DM, reward that kind of creative thinking, of course. And those, it was not just like refreshing. It was just like one of those like moments of like, this is D&D again, where it's without all this like. At this point, we've been playing for a long time, and I had this moment recently with making some new characters for a new game we're coming up with, where I was like kind of discussing things with one of the newer people who's playing in that game, and kind of giving them advice on what to take here and there, and like having to catch myself and be like, well, you read the list and you tell me what you think sounds interesting and we'll talk about it.
Right.
Because there's this childish like purity in playing D&D for the first couple times where you don't have all these years of knowing all the numbers and all the crunch. And so you just think creatively instead of thinking like, my character's good at this, I'll do this, and then I'll be successful.
Well,
you can be successful.
Character
in very
creation
wild
is
different ways.
absolutely one of the most common places, I think, to see
100%.
this statistics versus storytelling type of mentality.
And form versus function.
And I feel like the farther I've gotten into D&D, quite often, the more I've done this, I still really try and intentionally make suboptimal characters. I think partially exposure to Savage Worlds and its hindrances system is what sort of was almost an awakening of like baking flaws into a character makes the character more interesting, and I've tried to just do that a lot more often. But like that's always what you hear is how to do the best pyromancer build, how to do the best single target DPS rogue. And those characters can be a ton of fun and they can be very interesting characters. But I really miss not knowing everything, or like not knowing pretty much everything about every class, so that like every time I hit a level, it was like, oh, what do I get at this level?
Ooh, what
I
is
hit
this
4th level, so I can either increase a stat or take a feat. What are feats?
What
and
are
then
those?
reading through the feats and being like, dual wielder seems neat. I didn't have that in mind for this character previously, but is it optimal to be a halfling that's using a long sword and a short sword because I took the dual wielder feat? Absolutely not. But I'm doing that now.
That's not going to stop me. It's the same. I guess my journey with that has been kind of like this sort of like mountain and then fall back with like power level, where I kind of, as I understood the rules better and better, my characters suddenly started spiking more and more powerful until I kind of hit this sort of bull-like crest, which I'll explain that comment in a second. And then I kind of had this moment of like, being unkillable isn't fun. And then like kind of this easing back off and this like intentionally baking in these flaws and having weak points and kind of putting chinks in the armor of your characters, because I made like the unkillable character. I twice I made the character, and the bull, there was a character whose name was Bulwark, and then a character's name was Buldar. And they were both similar concepts, but the basic idea was I wanted to make like the ultimate tank character in D&D. And I did this combination of classes and abilities that made it so like my character very rarely got hit, and when they did, it was for such a minuscule amount of damage that I could stand in the way of anything, and like my character was near unkillable. To the point that the first game I ran one of this style of character, I made a deal with the DM to get the character killed off to play a replacement character because I wasn't really having fun with that. And then I kind of, as a thought experiment, revamped the build and told the current DM about that.
And that in your defense, you didn't have any fun doing it the first time, and it was entirely a thought experiment the second time. And the DM went, "You should play that character," and you sort of. Which is an odd idea that you argued against playing a character that you had statted. But the DM kind of talked you into it, and then a couple sessions in realized his mistake and had to find some way to kill you.
He had a wizard use power word kill on my character because my character's at like 80 some hit points or something at that point, and so power word kill would insta kill me with no chance of stopping it. And like the next level up, I think I would have gone over 100 hit points, and I think he felt like one more level up and this guy just is not killable. And he could tell, I think, that I wasn't having as much fun playing that kind of character. And so this kind of goes, there is still this fine balance to strike up here, where if you have like a cool combination of abilities that you have in mind that's really powerful and effective, don't shy away from using that.
Right.
Just bake that into a character. Don't make your person be this like, I found this Hexblade, Paladin, Assassin Rogue mix that does 1,000,000 damage each time it hits. And it's like, that's awesome. What's your character? Yeah. It's like, is he just a robot that walks around and swings a sword and they explode? It's like, good for you, but make something more to it than that. Make this Holy Avenger Assassin character have a backstory and be interesting.
Right, and you've started doing a thing quite often recently when statting characters in D&D that you force all the players to pick a free feat, but in most cases it can't be a feat that like contributes to their build.
Exactly.
It has to be something kind of weird or something kind of out of left field. Which is why the first time you did that, the character that I statted ended up with an arguably useless skill, which is essentially the pet pal perk from the Divinity series. Like, he can just talk to animals. And I think, well, I can't say never. I think exactly once in all of your D&D campaigns has talking to animals ever paid off. It's always hilarious. Like, it's always remarkably entertaining. But animals are just dumb.
Bit of advice for DMs out there here. Quick side note. Speaking with animals can divulge very important information. However, just because you can talk to an animal doesn't mean that animal is no longer a stupid rat or a stupid squirrel. Like, it's still the intelligence that it is. And it's hilarious and fun for your players to have to try and roleplay a conversation with an idiot animal to try and get useful information.
Well, and it doesn't help that character that I statted is a Kenku. So even if he gets anything useful from an animal, he's not necessarily going to be able to convey it easily to the rest of the group. And like, it's essentially useless. You've given me a useless ribbon ability
for free,
for free. So of course I took it. It was free. But it makes the character overall a little more interesting and a little more entertaining.
And I really suggest doing this as a DM. I've fallen in love with it just from the couple times we've done it so far, because the thing that kind of sparked this idea in me was seeing this massive feats list and being like, I've never seen half of these used. And it's because feats and ability score improvements are so few and far between and so valuable that when you get to it, if it's not making a big difference in your character's ability to do the things you want them to do, you feel no need to take it. No one, unless you're just making a kind of goofy character, you're probably not going to take the like cook feat that lets you be good at baking stuff. But it's an amazing feat with some interesting utility and is really fun and makes your character really interesting. And then all of a sudden you have this granny barbarian smashing people with a frying pan and handing out cookies to the party. And that's exceptional and wouldn't have been the character if that free feat wasn't there. And then the player doesn't have that feeling of like, I am making a suboptimal decision in order to have my character be interesting and weird in a dynamic and different sort of way. It's handed to them so that they're obligated to take something non-optimal or non-build centric, so that they can, because they get it for free, and it has to be that way, so they don't get the choice of doing something else. So then they're kind of forced into thinking creatively with it.
Well, and I'm a very strong proponent as a DM, and it's something that I've started trying to do a little bit as a player as well. It's like, I, as a DM, am absolutely willing to cut deals with players in terms of statistics and skills and stuff like that. And it's something that you do occasionally as well. Like, quite often, as you or I are making characters for each other's campaigns, it's like to use as an example the character that I statted out just a couple days ago. It's like, we were talking about giving the character disadvantage in deception because it just makes the character funnier. Yeah. And will absolutely cause massive problems over the course of the campaign.
And it takes away a specific piece of utility that the kind of character you're playing is, but we don't need to go into
that. The character would normally sort of have this suite of skills, and has quite a few of them. But there's like sort of a vital piece of that build that we talked about giving them disadvantage on. And I sort of I purposefully left charisma low so that deception wouldn't have a bonus. And so then, like, we just cut a deal that I could get proficiency in another skill if I took a permanent disadvantage to all deception checks.
Similarly, I had a character who had wanted to have a hobbled leg, and I asked if I could make a trade for an expertise in a skill in return for a permanent reduction to my movement speed. And
it was a fairly significant reduction as well.
It was a half or a third of the normal speed. I think it was 10 feet.
Yeah, I think it was a full 10 feet. But like it's you could argue that it's like you're improving your build. You're making the statistical choice. You're getting. I was never going to use disadvantage anyway, so the expertise in the
deception
the disadvantage in deception isn't that big of a deal if I'm getting proficiency in agility, which I wouldn't have had it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, but it is like it is, at least in my view, purposefully making a decision that hinders your character for story purposes. And in both cases, there's story context as to why the character is that way. Why this character has agility but is terrible at deception. Why Hadrian Victus had a bad leg, but he's this very intimidating figure. It's purposefully making story decisions and purposefully causing your character trouble. I mean, the hindered movement speed came up a couple of different times.
It made my character basically unable to run away from combat, and as he was kind of a backliner, he had times where he was an artificer build, so he was able to kind of tangle in the front lines and stuff too. But there's moments where like an enemy is pursuing me or trying to get up close to me, and my character's trying to stay back and fire. And I could disengage, run away, and they're always able to catch up to me because I have this hobbled leg, which makes sense for the character and the backstory. And the thing I love about that deal with the DM sort of ways, it goes back to our talk about like riding that balance between like optimization of a character and story optimization, and making an interesting character. Because if you give your players the opportunity to make unoptimal decisions but give them something in return so it doesn't feel like a punishing thing to do, then they're going to be a lot more likely to do it.
In pretty much every possible turn, if you offer like a sort of risk v reward or a gamble, or I'll give you this bonus or this skill, but this bad thing is going to happen. Almost always players are going to take that decision.
At least one.
There was, I mean, you and I have had that conversation. I don't remember exactly what the context of the magic item was, but we sort of came up with this theoretical idea for a magic item that was like it's like had these like bonuses or whatever, but it had this setback. And you made the comment of, I can never introduce that in a campaign that you're in because I know you'll just take the deal immediately. Like whatever the deal is, it's like, yep, done. Like I'm in. That's just how players tend to be. Quite often across the board. I know like our good friend Matty G is absolutely that way. Brandon is absolutely that way.
Especially if the thing gives him more damage.
Yes, it's like I don't care how much blood I'm losing to do this. I'm taking.
I see it
deal.
as fuel for my extra d6s I'm rolling.
And that same player, like if you're a player and you recognize that you're that way, it's not a bad idea to let that translate into some story decision that you make as well. I think a good example of this is the Gothic horror campaign that you ran for some time a while ago, where at one point my like sort of monster slayer character made essentially a deal with the devil, and it ended in the death of several people and sort of this whole chain of events happening, and we eventually like sort of just jumped and killed that demon in order to like sort of break that tie. But it absolutely, like, it was a very story-driven decision as to him being like, it's like in sort of the order that he's a part of, being willing to be the evil to defeat the evil. So it felt like this very sort of justified, like this is what the order would do. Is like, I'll make a deal with a lesser demon if it helps me stop this other thing that's going on. And then by the end of it, him being very much the opposite type of character.
Yeah.
Like by the end of that, very much like not willing to cut deals, not willing to make those sacrifices anymore. Like evil is evil, small or big, and I'm not going to like choose one over the other. Like, and in sort of in both cases, it was sort of an unoptimal decision.
Yeah.
Like, it was an unoptimal decision to make the deal in the first place. It was clear that
making the deal with it was like, this is not a good idea.
Yes. And I lost a significant number of sort of bonuses that I was getting by sort of having this kind of demon familiar when we sort of betrayed it and turned against it. But like it absolutely influenced. It was a very character-influenced decision and a suboptimal one. And then it was a very character-changing decision and a suboptimal one. Like, so those being willing to sort of take or break those deals, if it tells a better story and matches what your character is, shouldn't be something that players are too afraid to shy away from. And it shouldn't be something that DMs are afraid to offer.
Yeah.
I've often wondered what would happen if I had a villain approach a player character to the side in one of my campaigns and sort of offer them the
turn on your fans, work for me,
kind of deal. Like, I've often wondered what would happen, and it's very dependent on the type of character you approach and the specific deal that was being offered. I was actually kind of worried about that at the end of the campaign that I ran, that if you guys had given the main villain the chance to sort of explain himself, which you guys never do in any of my campaigns. Like, not even main villains, minor villains. It's like he shows up and he opens his mouth to monologue.
Drop the ceiling.
Like, yeah. Trigger all 4 traps in the room, take off running. Mm-hmm. Like, what was that guy? Was that guy trying to say something? I don't know.
I don't know. He's dead now.
I was actually worried for some months that when the main villain had a chance to explain himself, that Hadrian would choose to side with him over... over these people that he had been fighting alongside for the whole campaign, just because of the type of character you were playing.
Mm-hmm. You see, in the same campaign, I had the concern that by the time we got to the end game, Hadrian would have become enough of a villain that the party would have felt the need to turn against him.
And I was worried about that as well because of the sort of post-credit scene of that campaign with this sort of mysterious figure that you guys had been interacting with the whole campaign, like giving you a chance to get rid of the magical MacGuffin. Mm-hmm. And I was, like, your character had this whole sort of descent and evolution over the course of the campaign that that was the other thing that I was worried about, was well, he won't side with the villain and they will, like defeat him and sort of stop this crisis, but then he's going to choose to keep the magical MacGuffin because he's the only one smart enough to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's why there were sort of there's sort of this element laced through parts of that campaign of, like, when the time comes, make the right decision. Mm-hmm. And you did, but it was there was some hesitation there. It was a very interesting moment.
So when making a character and when making decisions as a character, it's not wrong to make good decisions, but it's always right to make interesting decisions.
Yes, absolutely. That is an excellent way of phrasing it.
You don't have to hamstring your character in the sake of making it just so that you can say your character.
Oh, a couple people on the internet told me I should make bad characters.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not saying, like, make a wizard with innate intelligence and that'd be a hilarious character who's maybe, but I mean, if you might be able to find a way to do it. What I'm saying is, don't shy away from unoptimal decisions that make for a really good story. Whether you're the person running that story or you're a character in that story. Because oftentimes, the most memorable and compelling pieces of a story are the parts that either fail or succeed spectacularly and from an angle that no one saw coming.
Absolutely.
The memorable part is not the perfect combination of abilities where you just did a ton of damage in one hit and you're like, wow, I sure did hit that enemy real hard. Your turn. But Woolsworth, God of Sheep, and Sergio scratching the pillow instead of stabbing them, like, that's memorable. And so don't shy away from those moments.
And I think in sort of a weird way, you will find that often the dice reward decisions like that. Mm-hmm. Like, we couldn't have planned for Sergio to perfectly nail every stealth check, getting into the governor's residence and slashing the pillow, only to horrendously mangle the first stealth check he made trying to escape, which triggers this whole chase scene and
where he gets shot and nearly dies.
This whole, like, dramatic reveal. Like, the dice did that. Mm-hmm. Or the very first adventure campaign, your character with, like, a 6 or 8 in strength or whatever, trying to help the other low strength member of the party out of a hole before a trap rolled through, and making it literally the round before the trap would have rolled over.
The dice gods do tend to err on the side of story. And so if you err on the side of story, then the dice gods are with you.
Quite often.
It seems
it's weird. It's weird how often that.
I'm not saying magic is real, but dice gods are, and they will bless you this day if you err on the side of story.
Be nice to your dice. They take it personal. It seems like. I don't know what I did to piss off all of mine.
I think that my dice just really like running games because they tend to do very well when I am.
No, you're right.
And a lot worse when I'm
playing. No, my dice don't like me, whether I'm running a game or playing in a game. They're against me either way.
Well,
I
think that's
call it there.
Good place to stop it. Definitely. So yeah, again, don't don't shy away from story decisions. Don't shy away from making the interesting decision. It's always going to make for a better story. That doesn't mean don't make an exceptionally powerful character. If you have a cool idea, you can still do that. Just make a character and then have that character make decisions that are interesting, not necessarily optimal.
And at the end of the day, you are playing a game.
Have fun.
You know, this isn't, at least very rarely is this done in any sort of competitive sense. It's almost always groups of friends playing a game and telling a story. So make it fun, make it interesting. That's where, like, that's going to give rise to the moments that you are going to remember
and that you're going to cherish. Hope that you found this interesting. If you have any opinions on this, any interesting detriment sort of decisions that maybe you made with your characters or kind of cool builds that could use something like that, feel free to throw that in the comments or share that down there. Please leave a like. Go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities. We'll see you next time.
I mean, we've got, like, technical difficulties music now. It's the original. Like, I don't know if you noticed that. Skler really liked it in the Dread recording that we did. When we had to stop and switch the cameras around because we had the tower cam and then the wide cam, which I really liked. Going through the editing, I really liked how that was working out. But it was when we had to switch them out, I put in a couple slides just saying that, like, one of the cameras died, so we had to, like, swap it around, so we weren't going to have that, like, close-up tower cam anymore. And I used the original downtime activity stuff that Skler wrote, like, pretty much right when we started the channel. That was, like, that we joked about sounded like a 80s or 90s workplace safety training video.
Yeah.
I just used that music in the background, and Square was like, I was worried that was going to be completely unusable, and then you found a place where it just fit perfectly. So if we knock the camera off of there, then when we reset it, I'll just use that again.